Hello. I want to begin with something very ordinary. A second-hand bookshop. As you know, I tend to drift into these places, not looking for rarity, looking perhaps for novelty, actually. I'm interested in what survives, perhaps rather than what sells. Uh, I saw a modest volume, not a collectible, not rare, not beautiful, a modest memorial biography published in 1896. No literary ambition here, no historical bombast. Someone simply believed that the life of this man was worth remembering. And that was the question that caught my attention as I lived through it. What kind of life was considered worth preserving by serious people at the end of the 19th century? Why was this particular life worth remembering? The name was Stevenson Arthur Blackwood. I didn't say that right. Stevenson Arthur Blackwood. Let me show you this. Let me show you the book. This is the book. Nothing much to look at. And here we have what I have. Picture of the man. You see? Don't know whether you can see it properly. It says, some records of the life of Stevenson Arthur Blackwood, compiled by a friend and edited by his widow. In London by Hodder and Stoughton, 27 Paternoster Row in 1896. Okay, so first, the core thesis, what this video is really about. This is not a video about a forgotten Victorian bureaucrat. It's more than that. It is about a form of Christianity deliberately reshaped to govern. Why that specific form of Christianity eventually collapsed, and why it needed to be restructured after World War I, again after World War II, and why we are seeing it being restructured again today. We are witnessing it. This was about the world view of the British Empire. The old world, Christendom, the Catholic world had gone. The Catholic world had been changed into a new world, now led by the British Empire, its ideology and its vision of the world, a new vision. The old world was gone. So now a new Protestant world was now beginning. So we are going to see this change now by looking at one of its representatives. How it was first before World War I, what it was like then. This is what this book is about. Again, how it started and how, at the peak of its power. Stevenson Arthur Blackwood is a type, not a hero, a Victorian Anglican imperial administrator whose life reveals how Protestant moral certainty, stripped of sacramental authority, became the moral operating system of the British state and the British Empire, and why that system could not survive war, collapse, or modernity. It had to reincarnate. He was born sometime in the late 1830s. A Crimean War veteran, a British civil servant, a senior imperial administrator. Not famous, not a hero, not heroic in the modern sense, not brilliant, no great speeches, no great books. And that is exactly the point. Yet, even though he was not a hero, he was given a memorial biography. Notes and letters, as we saw, lovingly collected by a friend of his, edited by his widow, published by a serious house who was very much respected for biographies and that type of genre. This book is not about an exceptional man, it is about a representative one. Blackwood belonged to the Crimean generation, that group of men whose moral authority rested on service and duty, not ideology. For Victorians, Crimea mattered. It was not just a war, not because it was the war had been glorious, it hadn't been, but because it marked discipline and the catastrophe. It was a moral credential. Men who served there, especially quietly, competently, were marked for life. They were trusted. Their authority was assumed. After the war, men like Blackwood did not become politicians, they became administrators. They held together the machinery of empire. And this is the class that truly governed Britain. They ran offices, they drafted reports, they managed systems. They held together the machinery of empire. His eventual honor, he had been given an honor, a Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath, tells us exactly what kind of man he was. This was an honor, not the greatest one, but for reliable administrators. Not flamboyant, not visionary, but reliable, disciplined, trusted. So this book is a Victorian moral document. It is not trying to entertain you. It is trying to show you what kind of man should govern. Duty, stoicism, service without complaint. This was the moral administrative class of the British Empire. And it was saturated, utterly saturated with Anglicanism. Not Anglicanism as a private belief, and certainly not religion as a hobby. Anglicanism as worldview, as ethics, as civilizational confidence, as the moral grammar of governance. This matters because Anglicanism then was not a denomination competing in the marketplace. It was the moral nervous system of the state, a Greek ideal baptized and anglicized. And this matters because by the 1890s, something was already ending. The Crimean generation was dying out. Imperial confidence was fraying a little bit at the seams. The Boer War loomed, Anxiety about decline was, at the time, everywhere. So this book is an act of memory, a quiet attempt to preserve a type of man, a quiet argument about what kind of man ought to govern. A man who believed, sincerely, that Britain had a moral calling to rule. The biography itself tells us how it wants to be read. It says, I have compiled some records of the life, notes and letters compiled by a friend. This is not hero worship, it is moral preservation. So I was leafing through it, seeing what it was about, checked the index, and then something curious happened near the end of the book. Spain appears, Spain and Portugal. There was no travel writing here. I didn't expect it to be. My ears pricked. And somehow, just reading one or two sentences, I knew what was coming. And sure enough, I have quite a few of these books. Certainly when it comes to Spain, and that has to go with Catholicism. I'm talking about the change of an era, yes, from the old world to the new world. The, shall I say, derision or disguised contempt is obvious. It is obvious to me, being a Spaniard, being at the other end. I was interested to see how it was depicted here. I've learned to look for what is not said. A passing observation, a remark here and there. As usual, Spain is not being described, it's being judged. Blackwood recounts meeting an Anglican vicar in Spain. They talk about reform, they talk about conversion. Conversion of Spain, yes. To modern ears, this can sound a little bit eccentric or worse, but it wasn't. It wasn't. It was serious. Historically, it is entirely coherent. Were there many Anglican vicars in Spain at the time trying to convert Spain away from Catholicism into Anglicanism? It's a little bit strange, but yes, there were Anglican clergy in Spain and Portugal in the 19th century, officially to serve British expatriates, diplomats, merchants, engineers, sailors. Unofficially, many believed they were doing something else entirely. Whatever their rank, they never stopped at being simply observers. Many believed that Catholic Europe itself required re-evangelization. Spain in particular functioned in Protestant imagination as a warning. Once great, now declining. And the reason they believed, or they assumed, was religious. Rome, priests, ritual, authority. Spain becomes a mirror held up to Britain. May we never become this. There is something deeper than contempt here. It's something, I think, even more dangerous than hatred. It is certainty on their part. The Irish might understand what I'm talking about. I've learned to read between the lines. Again, comparing the old world to the new, that is why it interests me. Words like superstition, priest-ridden, formalism are not meant to be insults, are not insults. Gentlemen do not insult. As La Rochefoucauld said, eloquence resides not in a person's tone of voice, expression, and general bearing, but in his choice of words. And because those words are more than descriptive adjectives, I know, because I have read quite a few, that they are more than adjectives, they are analytical categories. It's a classification of sorts. We were being classified, given a number. Number 42. Now, the English imperial elite were good at classifying civilizations. And the Catholic Church was one such. And after being classified, a civilization was then judged morally. So I'm going to walk you through a few of these decoding words that I found. Let's decode the language used. I kind of enjoy doing this. Superstition, superstitious practices. You encounter this quite a few times. Okay, so the tone is regretful, saddened. It's a sadness here. The real meaning is Catholic ritual is irrational, is childish, and is intellectually inferior. And this almost always targets, of course, the veneration of the Virgin Mary, and, the saints, all that. The unsaid implication is we read scripture, they perform magic. That's one. Another one, B, words that I always find, and I certainly found him here. Priest-ridden, under priestly influence. The tone is a kind of a sociological concern. The real meaning is the population is mentally enslaved and incapable of self-government. This phrase, under priestly influence, does a lot of work. It explains political instability, justifies foreign superiority, removes agency from ordinary Catholics. By priest-ridden, he is not talking about numbers. You have to understand this. The number of priests. No, he is making a civilizational judgment here. Another one. C. Want of education, ignorance of the people. The tone is philanthropic. Sorry. The meaning is Catholicism keeps people deliberately uneducated so Rome can control them. Often paired with praise of Bible reading, admiration for Protestant schools, quiet contempt for monasteries, etc. Another word that comes up quite a lot, formalism. In other words, mere outward observance. The tone is theological. The meaning is they perform rituals without inner moral transformation. This is classic Protestant anthropology. Real religion equates with inner conscience. Therefore, external rites are empty. Anglicans use this to distance themselves from Rome, but still sound charitable. Another one is a fine people, if only. There's always an if only thing. You know, the tone is benevolent. The meaning, their national failure is religious, not economic, and therefore their fault. This phrase preserves moral superiority, pseudo-humanitarian concern. An example structure of a sentence is, the Spaniards are naturally gifted, but the but does all the damage. Another one, the Bible not freely accessible. The tone is factual. This is a fact. The meaning is Rome fears scripture because it undermines priestly power. This is one of the strongest Protestant dog whistles. It implies conscious suppression by Rome, institutional bad faith, fear of truth. Another one, spiritual lethargy, a dead faith. The tone is always mournful. The meaning is Catholicism no longer produces moral energy, progress, or vitality. Often contrasted almost immediately with British industry, civic order, Protestant earnestness. Decay is framed as spiritual first, economic second. And then in this particular book, and I found it in others too, something about, I was kindly received by their clergy, by their priests, kindly received by them. This one is very subtle. The tone is polite. The meaning is even the priests themselves know they are on the wrong side of history. This is rhetorical judo, really. Courtesy on the side of the priests becomes confirmation. Hospitality becomes doubt or hesitation on their part, on the part of the priests. And civility is read as weakness. Another one, our Anglican chaplain, our Anglican vicar. Not the vicar or the chaplain received us. No, our, and the emphasis on our. Our Anglican chaplain. The tone, supposed to be neutral identification. The meaning is a lighthouse of truth in a sea of error. He's never just a chaplain. He represents moral order. He validates British presence. He stands as silent rebuke. Another one, the liberty of conscience in Catholic countries. This is going to be, the tone is a political principle. The meaning is Catholicism is incompatible with freedom. This phrase links religion, governance, liberal understanding of progress. It is a Protestant liberal theology in miniature. Now, how to read it with enjoyment? Once you see the pattern, the book becomes almost playful. One can count how often decay is moralized. One notes how rarely material and economic causes are sufficient. He is not raging, he is classifying. So when he speaks of Spanish decay, he is not analyzing economics. He is issuing a moral verdict, diagnosing spiritual failure as he sees it. And that verdict is deeply Protestant. Catholicism in this worldview produces passivity, dependence, stagnation. Protestantism, on the other hand, produces conscience and energy and self-government. So when Blackwood meets an Anglican vicar abroad, this is not accidental. Such men were nodes in a shared moral network of servers, interpreters, allies. Religion, administration, and imperial stability were assumed to reinforce one another. So, as I said, Spain became a mirror held up to Britain. May we never come to this. At this point, some of you modern readers your mind might go to, someone who was a member of the, how do we call it today, deep state, the Illuminati, the Freemasons, the secret rulers, the hidden networks. He might have been, but I want to, there is more to it than that, because he wasn't hiding anything. There was no secret doctrine here, no occult knowledge, no hidden rituals. That language may obscure those titles may obscure something that needs to be seen. What existed was something both simpler and perhaps even more unsettling. A ruling class that sincerely believed it was morally right to rule. There was no secrecy required here, no occult doctrine, no hidden rites. But there was a priesthood, indeed, of a different kind. An Anglican moral elite, civil servants, military officers, clergy. A bureaucracy one. Files instead of rituals, ethics instead of sacraments, administration instead of mystery. And they said so openly. They didn't hide their assumptions. They wrote them into biographies like this one. And so after I read that, continuing reading the book, you get necessarily between this old world and new world, we reach a fault line. Contempt for ritual? The English, really? No. Englishmen naturally know the power of ritual. They're very good at it. Pomp and circumstance, coronation, uniforms, they're very good at it. Why, then, could they not understand here the meaning of ritual, of religious ritual, how important rituals are? Because the derision is there throughout, yes? How could they not understand it? These were very intelligent men, highly educated, men that had read Homer and Virgil even before they got to Eton at the age of 13. Imagine then 5 or 6 more years before they went up to Oxford. They understood perfectly well the Hebrew sacrificial systems, patristic debates. They knew perfectly well that Christianity is incarnational, that worship is embodied. I'm going to deal with these issues in a minute. That sacraments were not optional add-ons. They knew that. So this was not about ritual being misunderstood. They understood ritual perfectly. They did, but they chose to distrust it. So the question becomes, why reject ritual after understanding it, since you understand it? The problem with Catholic sacramentality was not metaphysical, it was juridical. As I said, no problems with the Old Testament being sacrificial, the temple sacrifices, the ritual law, the priesthood in Israel, because they interpreted the Old Testament as preparatory, superseded, completed inwardly. Catholicism's claim that sacramentality continues now because of the incarnation was exactly what they rejected. The issue was not ritual, therefore, it was authority. Ritual implies mediation. Sacrament implies grace that does not originate in the individual conscience. Hence, an authority older than the nation state. And that was intolerable. That was the red line. So ritual implies mediation, priesthood, authority outside the individual conscience. So Christianity was quietly re-engineered, not abolished, not mocked, reinterpreted, not into paganism, into something very specific, a moral civil religion, a system of ethics. Christ becomes the moral exemplar. Atonement becomes ethical instruction. A church becomes a school of character. The clergy become educators, not mediators. This is why sermons mattered more than the liturgy. Why Bible reading mattered more than the Eucharist. Why character became a theological category. Christianity was thinned out deliberately to fit governance. This was not a conspiracy, it was a civilizational choice towards the new world. Catholicism frightened them, I think, because it made claims they could not manage. I'm going to deal with 3 of them, which are, I think, important. They refused grace, divine grace, as objective. What do I mean objective? This means that change doesn't happen only inside your feelings or opinions. It means, in the Catholic sense, that something real is believed to be given to a person. In this view, help from God isn't just encouragement and forgiveness or a new label. It is an actual inner change, like receiving a new capacity to live your life differently. Because of that, grace isn't treated as something private or self-defined. It is tied to visible actions, rituals, and institutions that exist outside the individual. That's why many people found the idea unsettling. It places something powerful in concrete things, in actions, in offices, in a church older than a nation state, rather than leaving everything to personal interpretation. Anything that places grace objectively in a priest's hands, a sacramental act, was experienced as a threat, not a mystery. So grace is number one that unsettled them. Another one is that truth is embodied. What do I mean? Here, truth is not just a set of ideas that you agree with. It is something meant to be lived, shown in action, and expressed through real human life. Truth is understood as something that takes shape in a person, in behavior, in choices, not in arguments or theories. If something is true, it should show up in how you live. This also means that the body, daily life, and moral choices matter. Truth isn't abstract or floating above life. It appears in concrete human reality. So knowing the truth isn't just about thinking correctly. It's about becoming aligned with it in how you act, how you live, how you exist. That's number two, that unsettled them. The third is authority is not negotiable. This means that some forms of authority are believed to be given, not voted into existence or redesigned by each generation. In this framework, in this old world, Catholic world, authority doesn't come from popularity or debate or consensus. It is inherited, passed down, and meant to preserve continuity over time. That authority exists to guard certain core teachings and boundaries, not to reinvent them whenever culture changes. While practical decisions, of course, can change, the foundations are treated as fixed. The idea is that without stable authority, truth may dissolve into opinion, and then nothing lasting can be protected. Another unsettling point was that the church precedes the state. This doesn't mean that the church should run governments. It means that moral meaning comes before political power. Nations, laws, states exist, of course, to organize life here and now. But questions about right and wrong, human dignity, and ultimate purpose are seen as older and deeper than any institution. In this view, the state manages society, but it doesn't define what a human being is or what ultimately matters. Moral limits exist before politics begins. So the church claims the right to speak out when political and civil laws cross those limits, not as a ruler, but as a reminder that political power is not the highest authority. So this new reinterpretation of Christianity was that, to put it bluntly or rather absurdly, a Christianity without Christ? No, not in their own minds, but yes, in effect. Christ became the perfect moral consciousness, the teacher of duty, the source of ethical inspiration, and less the logos, the high priest, the sacramental presence. The incarnation was affirmed verbally, but neutralized functionally. The hidden motive, governance. And here we reach an uncomfortable truth. A sacramental Christianity implies limits on state authority, an authority older than the nation state, a church that cannot be fully domesticated. But if that understanding of Christianity you convert it to a system of ethics, this Christianity implies compatibility with bureaucracy, alignment with law and administration, religion as a social glue, almost a sociological pattern here. So Blackwood, to go back to Blackwell, stands at the moment when this system still believed in itself, truly, sincerely. Men like Blackwell did not consciously say, let us hollow out Christianity to rule better. Of course not. But their instincts move them there. Because, you see, ritual creates obedience to mystery, but ethics create obedience to norms. It's amazing because Victorian Anglicans believed that Catholics were too ritualistic, too emotional, too obedient, but at the same time believing that they could all be fixed by, all that could be fixed by them reading the Bible quietly like Englishmen. And the empire ran on this contradiction. This is the contradiction. One that makes Catholicism transnational, ungovernable, resistant to the liberal progress, liberal history of progress, progress narratives. So in this situation, what I see is that Spain was not simply backward, you see, it was uncooperative with the Protestant philosophy of progress. Mystery creates obedience to something beyond the nation state. And, as I said, ethics creates obedience to norms. The second, the ethics is governable. The first cannot be controlled. They chose control over mystery and called it enlightenment. As I said, he truly believed it, but then what happened? Blackwood's world collapsed. Not Anglicanism as a church, but Anglicanism as the moral infrastructure of the English empire or the English state. World War I shattered it. It shattered its credibility. The clergy who had blessed catastrophe in some way lost quite a bit of authority. Empire lost its providential meaning. And then between the wars later on, theology fragmented. Then what we see is Anglo-Catholicism, so-called, retreated into ritual enclaves. Liberal Anglicanism moved toward more ethics and psychology. The church became plural, not authoritative. The old confidence, we know what Christianity is for, was gone. And then later, the cultural revolutions of the 20th century, after that, the authority dissolved entirely. The fatal turn, really, between the 1960s and 1980s, here is where collapse became irreversible. The cultural revolution of the 60s, the sexual ethics overturned, authority questioned everywhere, conscience detached from tradition, and Anglicanism tried to mediate rather than resist. Later in the 1980s, women's ordination did not cause this collapse, it revealed it. It marked the moment where priesthood was actually defined as a function, not a sacrament. This was not about women. It was about whether priesthood is ontological or functional, whether sacrament is received or constructed. By approving women priests, Anglicanism formally chose priesthood as an office, not a sacrament. And once that line was crossed, apostolic continuity, which they had always at least pretended to believe, now truly became something symbolic. A word about this apostolic continuity, because Anglicanism did not possess apostolic continuity. They knew that. At some level, the Anglicans always knew this. The ambiguity attached to it, nevertheless, was functional, rhetorical, and political, not ontological. Anglican claims to apostolic succession were always rather defensive, not foundational. Designed to secure legitimacy, not sacramentality. They were also rather a response to Rome, not an internal certainty. Even before Apostolic Cure in 1896, serious Anglican theologians knew that the break under Henry VIII and Edward VI was not merely juridical. The reform of ordinals changed sacramental meaning. So what Anglo-Catholics claimed was not continuity, perhaps, or not continuity as Rome understands it, but historical resemblance plus episcopal structure plus national church theory. That is not apostolicity, unbroken succession from the apostles. It is an institutional mimicry with theological aspirations. But once that line was crossed, apostolic continuity became symbolic. Anglicanism survived for centuries by saying, we look Catholic but think Protestant. That middle way could not survive ontology. Newman, John Henry Newman, understood this earlier than most, which is why he left. Orders became negotiable. Sacrament lost metaphysical weight, and that is the real break. And why could Anglicanism live in this ambiguity? Because its authority did not finally rest on sacraments. It rested on Parliament and the Crown and cultural consensus and moral credibility. So long as England believed itself Christian, Anglicanism could function without ontological certainty. Once that belief collapsed, the Church had nothing left to stand on. So women's ordination didn't break apostolic continuity. It merely made explicit what had never been there. Catholicism says you do not change what you did not create. Anglicanism said we may revise what we administer. Those are incompatible understandings of the church. So what happened to a certain respect or something for Catholicism? Something paradoxical remains. Before the collapse, Catholicism was despised, yes, but feared in a way. It represented rival authority. It threatened the Anglican monopoly. After the collapse, Catholicism is no longer feared. It is treated as one tradition among many, a heritage option, aesthetic Christianity. This is subtle, again. This is not respect, it's neutralization. Undermining it in a subtle, different way. Catholicism is no longer feared, it is neutralized. This is not respect, it's containment. So, is then the old classic anti-Catholicism, anti-Catholic attitude going to be revived then? No, because they no longer have the theological confidence to do so. Anti-Catholicism required believing objective truth, confidence in Protestant history, a sense of national mission. Those are gone. But something subtler remains. What does persist is discomfort with authority, suspicion of sacramental claims, a certain allergy to metaphysical limits. As I said, Catholicism is not attacked, it's contained. In other words, Catholicism is allowed to exist, but it's not allowed to be right. That is why Newman matters here. Newman, as I said, saw it coming. His insight was a church that claims development without authority becomes incoherent. Development without authority becomes incoherent. He understood that. If doctrine develops, someone somewhere must decide how. Without a magisterium, development becomes drift. And Anglicanism chose drift. So is there now a return for this old Anglicanism possible, the old Anglicanism that Blackwood believed in? Institutionally, very unlikely. Culturally and spiritually, perhaps yes, in fragments, in individuals, small communities, conversions, interest in liturgy by some groups, a hunger for authority that is not coercive, certainly, but it will not be an imperial religion again. So their stand now vis-a-vis Catholicism, well, they are certainly less hostile. They are certainly more aware of their own incoherence, incapable of renewal on old terms. In other words, the old Anglicanism that Blackwood believed in the old Anglican ruling theology is dead. What remains is a historic institution, cultural memory, residual moral language. Catholicism no longer needs to be fought because it cannot be absorbed. And Blackwood, sincere, disciplined, stands at the moment when the system still believed in itself. That is why it is quite an amazing biography, which leaves us with the final truth his life reveals. A Christianity thin out for administration and governance, governance purposes, cannot fully carry human suffering as well. And when suffering comes, civilizations built on that understanding of Christianity collapse. So now we are going to see other changes. After World War II, this old British Empire would take a different form in the Anglo-American world order. And right now, that is collapsing too. Why? What next now? That's where I leave you. Thank you for listening. Bye-bye.